Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Reinvent Legal Business Series 2. In this series, for those of you that have been with us for some already, you know that we're exploring from a global perspective new themes that have emerged in things that have changed or have expanded. And we're basically looking at how that's impacting what we're now increasingly referring to as our legal ecosystem. As you also will recall, we offer these sessions as live webinars, as you will see us today, and also we make these available as podcasts as part of our Legalpreneurs Sandbox podcast series. So you can watch and listen, or listen as the case may be, whichever format is going to suit you best. Today, we're discussing making legal decisions differently, knowledge management, data analytics, and so much more. And indeed, there is going to be so much more, but let me give you a quick highlight of the sorts of things that we will be exploring today. We're going to kind of look at some definitions around what data and knowledge management is. We're going to look and also going to hear from the specialists that you see in front of you about what they do. So what do KM and data specialists do? We're also going to look at where data is used in a whole bunch of different places in legal practice and the relationship between tech and data and knowledge management. We're not focusing today on those things relating to data that particularly incorporate things such as privacy or security or whatever. We're looking at data today and knowledge management today in terms of a legal business and a legal practice context. To give you some background about them, their organisations and the work that we do. So before we get Beth to kickstart us with that question, I first of all want to say on behalf of the Centre a huge welcome to you, Beth, and to Carolyn and to Jon. And to Jon particularly because you're doing this in your late afternoon or evening from the US, and of course Beth and Carolyn the day afterwards, as it were, in Australia. So welcome very much, folks. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Beth, you're first up. You're going to kick us off. Tell us all about you and your organisation and what you do.
Thanks so much, Terri, for having me on. It's a real privilege to be with you here today. So I'm director and founder of a company called ESP Connect. And I set that business up about 18 months ago with a goal of progressing the use of legal tech across the entire legal ecosystem, whether that's law firm, corporate, tech company, university. I've got clients in all camps. And we work with those clients on strategy, implementation, design thinking, and building multidisciplinary teams to deliver results. I'm also a fellow at the UTS Law School, and prior to setting up my own consultancy was with Allens, a large corporate law firm in Australia and Asia. And I was there for 20 years as the Chief Legal Technology Services Officer and had a multidisciplinary team of about 60 people delivering legal tech and innovation for the firm. So thank you very much again, Terri, for having me.
Oh, fantastic, and you're most welcome. Jon, you're the next on the list. Tell us about you.
Yes, thank you, Terri. I really appreciate being here tonight. So thank you for all your effort and work on this. My name is Jon Metcalf. I am the principal data scientist at Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati. They are a premier law firm focused on technology law as well as life sciences law. They're located in Palo Alto, but they also have offices throughout the world. What I do, so I should also say that my background is also that before I was principal data scientist, I was also the marketing technology director at Fenwick and West for 10 years before that. And I had been working with emerging technologies for years. Before that, I was with Mendelsohn in the early 2000s. And what I do as a principal data scientist today is I really work on a lot of different factors and areas of data, such as collecting, assessing, analyzing, and being able to present the data in a way that is meaningful and provides meaningful information to management and other people throughout the firm. I've been working with data for quite a while now, And it's really interesting to see how many tools are cropping up today that allow us to do so much more with data that were not there before. And I think it's really amazing to think about how the innovation of data and how it's going to transform law firms in the future is quite amazing. So thanks again for letting me be here tonight.
It's an exciting time to be doing the work that you do, Jon. I mean, the work that all of you do, but I think, particularly it's really coming into its own. So thanks very much for joining us, and really looking forward to this discussion with you. And Carolyn, last but certainly not least, tell us about your background. What do you do?
Thank you, Terri. Hello, everyone. So my title is Director of Knowledge and Practice Support, and I work at K&L Gates. I'm located here in Sydney. I guess, first of all, I could say that I am a lawyer. My background is I started my career as a commercial litigator, but most of my career has been in legal knowledge management. I should also say that because I have a legal background, I am in no way a data scientist. So I want to just put that disclaimer out there right now. And I'm very excited to be in the company of people today. As well as my job title, I also co-lead the Innovation Committee for K&L Gates here in Australia. And I also serve on the Global Innovation Committee for our team, for our firm. For those who may not know, K&L Gates is a fully integrated global law firm with 45 offices across 5 continents and around 2,000 plus attorneys worldwide, with a broad commercial practice. And I will not say anything more because we just have a shiny new website that has just been launched. So if you would like to know more, please go ahead and visit our new website. So my team, I head up a team of senior lawyers, knowledge technicians, and design thinkers. And our remit from the firm is to deliver knowledge solutions, support innovation, drive digital adoption across various of our practice areas, and facilitate collaborative solutions for our lawyers and with clients. And my passion is knowledge management. So for the past 8 years, I've been really very fortunate to be a sessional lecturer at the University of Technology here in Sydney in the Masters of Digital Information Management program, focusing on knowledge management strategies.
Fantastic. Carolyn, we'd be worried if your passion wasn't knowledge management. So I'm glad that all those forces have aligned. That's really important.
Absolutely.
I thought we'd kind of start by doing some definitions. And I know that for you, all of you here, and perhaps many of you listening today, some of this is second nature, but it seems to me that the whole area of data and knowledge has become quite complex. So it's probably helpful to start at the beginning, as it were, in terms of the definitions. So I guess if we look at data, there seems to be a process. A kind of obvious one is that it starts with generation, and then it's collected and collated and it's stored, and there's some sort of governance issues around access, and then it's maintained and it's managed. But it also seems that all of that is happening in 2 broad spheres, one in kind of the practice of law and one in the business of law. So I was wondering, Beth, if we could ask you to kick this off again and tell us or give us some sort of parameters or definition of what data is when we're talking about it in relation to the practice of law.
Sure, Terri. Great question. So several years ago, a partner said to me, Beth, I think law firms are going to become tech companies. And I was absolutely shocked. And what I realized at the time, and this was several years ago, is that he saw that future. And what did that partner actually see? He saw that his work product, the written word that lawyers produce as a work product, is going to over time reduce to data. So what does that mean in the practice of law? Basically, as a lawyer, you have client data. So, for example, in the field of e-discovery, a big litigation, you know, a standard case 20 years ago was 10,000 documents in paper. Today, it's well over 1 million documents on an average case, and that's not just for a large firm; it's for small firms as well. You can fit a lot of data on a USB key that might be discoverable. So data comes in the form of client data. And another form is the data that lawyers themselves produce as advices or whatever for their clients. And that written word, there's a technology in the industry, natural language processing, that many of you will have heard lots about. And it's really evolving. And I think we're really, quite frankly, just in the beginning of what NLP can do. And there are a lot of hard problems to solve. And that data, the data that our lawyers are producing in the written word, using these technologies like natural language processing, it's going to be able to actually reason and provide insight. Now, Terri, I'll just give you a few quick examples of how data is being used in the practice of law. I touched on e-discovery. It's probably the most mature area where data is being used actually to find the evidence to win a case. Another big area that's just developing is contract analytics. So in a typical due diligence, contracts are now being reviewed and they're being reduced to data. And AI algorithms are running over that data to produce and find clauses. A great example of that in this new coronavirus world is finding the force majeure clauses across bodies and bodies of contracts. That's been a common use. Another is contract drafting. So there's technology now that looks at previous precedents, like that used to be in our traditional knowledge management bailiwick, and is actually predicting what you might need to draft in a letter of advice. Or contract assessment, where you might have an employment contract and you run it through an AI system. It reduces that contract to data and then provides insight of where the contract might be good for you and where it might be bad for you. That reasoning part is still in its really infancy. Another area is risk and compliance. You know, the rise of regulation and the complexity of that is huge. And there's lots of technologies being applied again to contracts and to data that our clients are producing to decide whether things are compliant or not. An example of that is the traditional contract lifecycle management systems, where you used to just hold your contracts. There are now algorithms running across those contracts, reducing them to data and providing insights as to where the risks are in your contracts. And lastly, knowledge automation. There's a whole branch of artificial intelligence called expert systems. And basically, we're reducing the reasoning of lawyers and using that to put into these expert systems. So, for example, a common application has been NDAs, so non-disclosure agreements, automating a non-disclosure agreement so that clients can self-serve and produce NDAs automatically. So I hope that gives you a quick insight into how data is being created in the practice of law and then being used with these new technologies like natural language processing.
And I guess in that use, Beth, it's running the full gamut, isn't it, of kind of like being a tool to assist all the way through, or automation obviously as well, but all the way through to actually just augmenting. So it's just the way that you will be practicing in those, in particularly in the practice areas that you've kind of alluded to.
Absolutely. And that's only going to grow. And I think the quote that I started with, our law is going to be a tech company. I think that's a really important point of how much of what lawyers do will be reduced to data. And I always like to say, not all of it. So there will always be jobs for lawyers. And it's, to your point, Terri, it's about augmenting what lawyers do to, one, make it more efficient and more cost effective. There's a real client drive of more for less. And that's what these tools can do. They can help the practice of law become more efficient. And secondly, create new opportunities for law firms to build products that they probably have never even thought about. So it's a whole new model of service delivery for law firms.
Absolutely. And Beth, just for anyone that doesn't know what that means, natural language processing, can you give us like a few seconds on that? I know it's big, make it little.
Yeah. Basically what NLP or natural language processing does is, say, take a contract and it reduces it to basically the relationships of words. And those relationships of words, it then compares against other documents to find similar documents. And I won't go through the technical detail of how it finds the relationships, but it's basically looking for patterns. I mean, one question I had once in a demo to work with lawyers was, Beth, how does it read the document? And when I said it actually doesn't read necessarily the English language, it's looking at bits and bytes and patterns. That's what it does. And in some ways, it's intelligent or smart, and in some ways, it's really dumb.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have the intelligence that a person has.
Yeah.
But it does some things really well, and it does fantastic things on large volumes of data that a human being couldn't read themselves. It finds patterns in those documents. In e-discovery, looking for relevant documents to an issue in a case, it will group similar documents, and it's very powerful in helping lawyers find the more relevant information so they don't have to review like they used to in a linear way and review a lot of irrelevant things that cost their clients a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. Jon, want to turn to you in the, how data is used in the business of law, because I guess we often think about it in terms of the practice of law, and that maybe is where we stop. And that's kind of somewhat externally facing, I guess. But there's a huge use case internally facing in the business of law as well, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And just quickly on NLP, what Beth is saying, it's really interesting because the first experiments with NLP were conducted just in 2011. We're thinking about that's only 9 years ago when we're taking a look at NLP, and it works like a neural network with layering where it starts to act like a brain, and it's amazing that computers can start to do that. But going back to your question, Terri, what I find is, and I've been doing this for such a long time, that taking a look at data from the business of law is really another essential aspect of law firm operations. And what I mean by that is that the business of law analysis is very similar to the practice of law. We take a look at the business units, such as matters and time entries and accounting details. We take a look at that, but we look at it in a different perspective. We take a look at that information that's being compiled on an everyday basis. And then we're taking that information and we're analyzing from the perspective of maybe not just the what and when, but also in terms of the how and the who and the why. And when you start to look at data, and that's sort of like that metadata approach of information about the information itself, we start to distill the information into smaller business units and then therefore be able to extract the information, the meaningful information that comes from those business units, data, and then be able to compile them in a way that makes sense and is meaningful for decision making and analysis. And what we do is, we look way beyond just the practice of law in terms of the practice groups and the attorneys and the legal staff and what they do, but we also look at other aspects of the data in a law firm, such as operations. We take a look at IT, at marketing, at finance. We take a look at facilities, and then we sort of think about how that data fits together. How is that data integrated with itself? Is there a particular marketing program that we have conducted that helps how business development is done? Are there matters that are coming into the firm because of a specific type of initiative that's going on through a practice group or another event or something like that? So the business of law takes it from a sort of a holistic perspective and says, okay, all this thing compiled together, how do we create profitability? How do we create efficiency? How do we create innovation? And what can we assess from the data itself? What can we learn from the data? And what's interesting also is that in the past, we used to look at data from analysis. that we used to analyze data and have very specific questions that we wanted to solve, problems that we wanted to solve. So we would set up innovation in a way, and it's funny to think that this is sort of old-fashioned now, where innovation used to be that you take a very careful assessment of information and discovery, and then be able to apply that very deliberately against specific problems. And as we do that, then we start to come up with potential innovations, ideas, discoveries of something that we hadn't done before. But with the tools today, with deep learning and NLP and other tools that are coming out with data science, we are finding that innovation, actually the types of the insights that we're getting from the data itself, assuming that we have large data sets that we can use to be able to do this, but assuming that we can, we're finding that the machines, the algorithms, the models that we're setting up are creating and finding and discovering innovation that we never saw before. And so that to me is where the competitive advantage is going to be in the future, of taking existing paradigms and models that we've had before and then be able to apply them in a totally different perspective, looking through these new data science models and algorithms. So the business of law is a way of breaking down fundamental units into basic data points, zeros and ones, and then making them available so that machines can do something with them. And that's really what it comes down to. And being able to ask the right questions and provide the right data to the algorithms is really quite an essential part of doing this.
And I guess combining, the sort of data that you were talking about, Beth, with the sort of data that you're talking about, Jon, and together those forming new pictures and new opportunities or new ways of looking at business performance and maybe even different revenue streams, which brings me to you, Carolyn. How does knowledge management fit in, and why are we talking about knowledge management in a way in the same breath as we're talking about data?
Okay. Well, I want to take just a step back and talk about knowledge management as a discipline and why it is that data is so important in the context of KM, both theoretically and in practice. So, as you probably know, there's no one definition of knowledge management. It's something that had its origins in a number of different disciplines, like the philosophy of knowledge called epistemology, which actually goes back to the time of Plato. So it's not a new discipline in many ways, if you look at where it comes from. It's to do with anthropology and sociology, as well as technology and business studies. So it really spans a lot of different areas, and how you think about knowledge management in your legal practice is informed by the characteristics of where knowledge management's come from as a discipline. You can think of it broadly as in two different ways. One is what we call, the objectivist perspective, which is knowledge as a thing. It's an entity or a commodity that can be captured, if you will, and categorized and codified, a thing. And another way of looking at knowledge through the literature is as a more of a practice-based perspective, which is more like knowledge as a flow. It's something that is absolutely inseparable from people. It's embedded in the way people interact with each other and the way they learn and internalize knowledge. If you look at data across that paradigm, I think there's a tendency in some of the language that I've heard around this to think about it in the first way, that it's purely objectivist. This is something that is a thing. And I want to challenge that, because I think that's not a necessary viewpoint. I think you can think of knowledge, data within knowledge as much more holistic than that. It is part of that knowledge that's embedded in people, but data can be drawn out from that. So I think that's the first thing I'd like to say. Secondly, in classic knowledge management theory, knowledge is all about action. And I really see this when we're talking about the application of knowledge management to data problems. The data that you choose to be interested in or prioritize has to lead to an outcome of some kind. Usually it's the basis of action or better decision making. And right back in the sort of the classic knowledge management theory, you had definitions like, knowledge is the capacity to act. or knowledge is the basis of decision and action. So that kind of concept is not new in knowledge management. It's very much on song with where we're coming from as a discipline. A few years back, knowledge management practitioners were castigated for not getting on board with big data soon enough. And I think that is, in many ways, a well-deserved criticism. But I also think that if you look at the traditional way of conceptualizing data, information, and knowledge, we've all seen those kind of pyramid models where you have all data on the bottom and then information, then leading up to knowledge and the apex of the pyramid. The problem with those sort of traditional models is, first of all, that they are very linear, and reality doesn't conform to that. You need knowledge to understand how you're going to turn data into information. It's not that one comes before the other. They're not linear and not hierarchical. Just because you have, knowledge on the bottom of the pyramid, data, on the bottom of the pyramid, and followed by information, followed by knowledge, does not mean that there's any hierarchy going on in there. And we need to be open as knowledge practitioners to really understanding and digging into what data can do for our practice, which is what Beth and Jon have talked about so well. So there's just a couple of things I want to add on what knowledge management isn't. It's not totally reliant on technology. Technology is an enabler of knowledge, particularly in the legal context, but it's not the be-all and end-all. A holistic approach involves thinking about culture, people, process, and technology as an enabler. That's the first thing. It's not about extracting and knowledge by force out of people's heads and codifying that in some way that is going to eventually replace people. That's not the objective, and it's not what knowledge management's all about. And lastly, it's not one size fits all. It is very much dependent on what you want to do with the knowledge that you're collecting in your organisation. What's your strategy? What's your context? What are your resources? What are you trying to achieve? So,
yeah, fantastic. So I wanted to pick up a thread that you just mentioned there, Carolyn, and in fact, Beth, you and Jon also spoke about this, and kind of, if you like, squarely throw a third element into the discussion, which is tech, because we can't talk about what we're talking about today without it. And I guess just drawing on those definitions that you have all kindly provided, and at its most basic, looking at practice, tech, will produce data. Data will, produce insights, and insights will produce knowledge or information. So in that kind of triangle, Beth, I'm going to ask this question of you first, the kind of knowledge, the tech and the data. Where do you start if you've got a problem to be solved? There's a bunch of possibilities. Do we start with the tech? Do we start with the data? Do we start with the problem? I'm sitting in a law firm, no matter what size, and I've got all this stuff in front of me. Where do I start?
Again, Terri, great question. The most important component of this entire equation is the people. And you've got to start with the people for a whole host of reasons. But to Carolyn's point, the tech, it's not just about the tech, it's an enabler. But I also like to say it is about the tech.
Yeah.
and that's because we all end up talking about it. I've done many, many client meetings, and they go, I want to be innovative. And there are plenty of innovations that do not involve technology. But mostly we land back on and what tech can enable this innovation. So while tech is only an enabler, it's a really important component. But you must always start with the people and figure out what problem you're trying to solve. Most startups fail because they solve the wrong problem. You get excited. People get excited, and especially people coming from the tech paradigm, and lawyers. We like to solve problems. So if you have an idea about how to solve a problem, you think your idea is the best. Well, it's not necessarily the problem the client wants solved. So the first thing you have to do is work through what problem are you trying to solve for the client? And is it an existing problem, or is it something that you foresee maybe a problem in the future? So there are two kind of components, an efficiency play or a new business model play. We use design thinking. Carolyn touched on it a little bit in terms of her practice as a knowledge management director. But design thinking is a skill now that really law schools are starting to teach their law students. It's become pervasive across industries, because what that paradigm or methodology does is give people a framework on how to figure out what the client problem is. And it starts with brainstorming what problems exist for the clients, using some methodologies around trying to prioritize what those problems are and where the value proposition is for the client. It involves prototyping, so not spending too much money, but prototyping some possible solutions and hypothesizing what that solution might be without spending a lot of money. And there's a term called safe to fail. I'm a bit of a cynic about that. I always say fail. How much can you fail? How much money can you spend to fail? So fail has a context. You're trying to design something where you can fail and not spend too much money. And the final component of that design thinking methodology is iteration. So hypothesize, test, and if it doesn't look like it's going to work, iterate and build on. People are creative, and people build on other people's creativity. And so you're trying to create a paradigm in that design thinking methodology to do that. Another component is, Terri, selecting the tech. Once you figured out the client problem, what tech is going to solve that problem? And I think often you hear of a lot of hackathons and design jams, and they're very good at finding the problems, but often they don't deliver then on the actual result of implementation, which is actually quite difficult because you need to match the right tech to the problem. Often there's more than one piece of technology that needs to be used to solve the whole problem. So one piece of technology might not solve the whole problem. And I like to think of technology as a river. It's moving fast and it's changing all the time. So you're trying to select the technology knowing that there's a rapid up ahead. And that, in 2 years' time, your investment might be gone. So you need a commercial context to how you choose the technology to solve the problem. And you need to put together, and this goes back to the people, a multidisciplinary team. And I can't emphasize that enough. I feel so strongly about it. I've practiced it. I've seen the results. When you are designing these systems, there's the content side, which is the lawyer expertise and knowledge, and it needs to be combined with a tech solution. So you need lawyers and technologists and project managers and data scientists. And another area of expertise is UX, or user experience, or client experience. So people who can design interfaces that make it easy to use. Again, a lot of systems fail because they aren't user friendly. So that UX, I think of it as, in the old days I used to present technology to lawyers, and they weren't that interested. It wasn't sexy, it wasn't interesting, until the iPhone came along. And all of a sudden the interface of the iPhone made everything easy and accessible. And so when you're thinking about building these systems, the UX is super, super important.
Yes. So let me draw on one part of your experience, if I may, and take you back, I guess, to your law firm days, but also relevant very much now in as a consultant. And this is one of the questions we've received as well. It's often hard in a law firm to get partners and others who are time poor to really focus on the sorts of things that you're speaking about, to get, really involved and collaborate in a multidisciplinary way, but also just to basically interact in doing the sorts of things that you're saying. Apart from having a global pandemic, which has kind of obviously changed things for everybody, how do you get them to take that time to get engaged? Because as you said, sometimes they're not that interested in the tech. How did you get your folks engaged with this whole process, this whole interplay of data and knowledge management and tech and continuous improvement and design thinking and all of those bits?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind, Terri, is you need a relationship of trust. And we were lucky enough to have built a very great team in the e-discovery space. We were able to leverage that expertise and that skill set, which was the same skill set that you need for innovation. So you have to build trust with your lawyers. The second, to your point, lawyers are always time poor. So we actually structured teams based on what was needed. And we leveraged, Carolyn, the KM team, because the KM team are experts in content. So instead of having to have the partner involved in every iteration of the content side, we would utilize the KM team member as the point for the content side of the solution. And then secondly, often bring in a junior or senior lawyer and to work with the technologists and the project managers. And that was kind of the core day-to-day team to build. What did a partner need to do? A partner needs to understand the risk, the value proposition, the cost, and the business side of the equation. And obviously needed to believe in the idea. And we needed their high-level support and their sign-off once we built it. But we tried to minimize the amount of time a partner had to spend. A lot of their role was sponsorship. And then signing off once we got the solution built. We needed their tick of approval, and particularly on the content side, because what you're asking a partner to do at the end of the day is take their expertise, feed it into a group of people that are going to combine it with technology. It needs to be right. Yeah. They need to be able to trust it. Yeah. So again, from the beginning, starting with the relationship of trust, getting the right team together, and minimizing the amount of time the senior people, the senior lawyers have to spend in the solution.
Thanks, Beth. Carolyn, I want to bring you in on that discussion because I also know that working relationship, creating that level of engagement is something that obviously is an integral part of your job. Thoughts in addition to what Beth has mentioned there?
Thank you, Terri. Yeah, I have a few things to add. But I really want to say, first of all, absolutely agree with what Beth has just said. Certainly in terms of multidisciplinary teams and the importance of them, the importance of design thinking, which we have found is incredibly effective at getting to the heart of a problem and helping us to understand it, helping us to prototype and get quickly out with a solution. I want to add that from a design thinking practice perspective, really important as well to understand who you're designing for, to put the person who's going to be the end user of your system squarely in the front of your thinking from the get-go. And that involves knowing not only what the right problem is to solve, but how that problem is going to be experienced from the point of view of the end user, which leads on to Beth's very good point about the user experience and being able to ensure that you have a very user-friendly interface to whatever you're designing. From a data perspective, we've all seen data visualizations that are either really effective or they are impossibly complex and very difficult to understand. So I feel like having yourself in the shoes of the person who's going to be experiencing the end result of all your hard work is really important up front. In terms, I do think that it's important to build that trust relationship and to leverage the expertise and the trust in your firm already. We often find as knowledge practitioners that we are, if you like, the bridge people. We're working very closely with our legal technology group, and we're also working very closely with the lawyers, and sometimes we're almost in the position of being a translator between them. And that's a comfortable place for us to be. And so that's an area of experience that is really good for people who are looking to develop new products to tap into. I think, don't underestimate your librarians. The people who are in your libraries are really keyed into what's happening in legal data and they have a lot of expertise to bring to some of these discussions as well. And I guess, finally, I think understanding not only what purpose your data is going to serve, but being able to kind of predict how that might serve objectives in the future is a key part of any project as well. So you might find, for example, that you're looking to drive efficiency through the data that you're collecting, and you want to drive metrics, and you want to be able to prove that efficiency is continuously improving. But maybe you also want to use that data to advocate for regulatory reform, or maybe you want to use it to advocate for more resources, or to develop another stream of service within your organization. And so to tease out those multiple objectives, I think at the start of the project is often something that design thinking can really do, that people don't often think about in the context of design thinking practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Jon, I want to come back and drill down a little bit on the data point for just a second with you, if I may, and to place that in this sort of context. And it also picks up one of the questions that we've had as well. Not everybody can afford to have you, right? Not everybody in every organization can afford to have you. So I guess the thing is, in all of this data, what should we be looking at? What's critical, particularly around, the business of law? What is it? What do we need to do with it? Where are we going to find it? What do we need to think about in terms of the data that we have, and how we bring it together so that it's going to basically be useful? And can we do that without it costing us a huge amount of money as well? So I know that's a big question, and you'll probably want to take it in pieces, but an important one, I think, for us to address, and as I've said, reflects the questions that we've had as well.
Yes, I just want to say how much I agree with Beth and Carolyn in terms of the process, in terms of how it's so important to bring in diversified thinking, ideal thinking, design thinking, and be able to have the right people involved in the problem, being able to frame the questions and the problem in the right way. And it does come down to people. I think that's such a critical aspect. Thank you, Beth, for saying that. At Wilson Sonsini, I work with very intelligent people every day, and I work across every single department. I have meetings with partners, I have meetings with practice group leads, and I have meetings with directors and everyday people, applications developers, who are all thinking along the same lines of trying to create meaningful value around the data that we're collecting. And so as long as we all agree on the fact that there is value in the data itself, that there's gold and then there are hills, if you think about it, that we just have to be able to extract that data and transform it in a way that provides insights and value back to the organization. So to answer your question, Terri, I think the first thing that I look at is that in order to provide and to create that goal of providing meaningful information back to the stakeholders, what's important for us is that we start with what we have. Law firms, as we all know, are just massive producers of amazing good data, and we do it all the time. We've been doing it for years. The tools that we have today, which we have with financial systems, with marketing systems, marketing automation systems, and facilities applications, et cetera, we just have so much data already. So in terms of not incurring too much cost and not being exorbitant in terms of going out and going overboard and trying to come up with value that is way too expensive and therefore not resourceful, not practical, it's really important to take a look at what you already have, and that's what we do. So we take a look at the data. For example, I get a set of matters, 300,000 matters, and you think about it, okay, well, what can you do with these matters? The first part is just a very short analysis of those matters. But instead, the reason that it's so important to have people involved is because people come in with different perspectives and they have different ideas about what to do with that data. For example, do the matters provide the information that we're looking for, or Is it possible there are gaps in the data that we don't have yet? So what else do we need to collect? And one person may not have that answer, but when you work in a team and you work as a group to take a look at that data, those kinds of questions and answers come up and they crop up in the discussions. So perhaps there are gaps in the data. We have to take a look at what do we need to collect? What data is missing? How do we transform that data? How do we break that data further down into components that actually provide more meaningful data or more meaningful information to the people who are looking at it? So it's a way of starting with what you have already and then be able to work from there in terms of what you actually need in addition to what you already have. Once you have that process in place, what I like to do as well is I like to start creating, as Beth said too, the prototypes. So we take a look at data sets, we take a look at data models, we take a look at prototypes of how we can take that information that we currently have, we visualize that information, we put it in front of people. We should say, based on what we have right now, here's the visualization that we can provide for you. And hopefully these are the data points that we're looking at. How do these data points fit together? We look at the relationships between that data. We look at the metadata behind that data as well. So it's information about the data itself. And as by looking at the data more closely and being careful and deliberate about it, we can take a look at the relationships between those data sets, ratios such as rate of change, velocity, decay, all those kinds of things that crop up by looking at data, just like for people who are professional stockbrokers who are looking at stock market data in a professional manner. We can take a look at data in a law firm setting and be able to come up with new ways and innovative ways to look at the data in the first place, cross-compare, relate it to each other, and then come up with potential new insights that we never had before. So really a lot of it is creativity, being able to look at it, assess it, look at the gaps, see where the gaps are, see where you can fill in the gaps, and then create prototypes and data models so that you can show the stakeholders what is there already. What the stakeholders provide is they provide good feedback about the value that the data model is providing back. They can provide feedback about ROI and additional resources that can be applied to that particular project. So we going back to the whole idea of that fail idea, which we call the minimally viable product, and be able to come up with something that is already a product in its own right, even though it's still at the very early prototype stage. And then once we assess that, and again, because of the fact that we're not spending a lot of money on this, we're using tools that are pretty much like Power BI, for example, that we can use these tools in place to create this value in almost immediately, and then be able to grow that product and grow that solution organically over time. And then of course, it could be that the way that we look at it and the perspective that we get from the actual project is that we do need more resources. So in that situation, the question comes up, should we pay for more resources? Do we need more people? Do we need more tools? How do we accomplish what we're looking for? Because now, going into the days and weeks into the project, we have a better assessment and evaluation as to what the project is and what kind of value it's going to provide to the firm. And so therefore, Beth and Carolyn said this as well, it's a moving target. And as you continue to work on it, you learn more and you can assess it. And sometimes the project is really not worth doing it in the first place. So that kind of information in its own right is valuable. And then you can move away from that project or change it and transform it to something else.
Thanks for that, Jon. I wanted to just ask you, and these may be and ask all of you, but perhaps to address this initially to you, Jon, just very specifically and in two key areas. If we were looking for data points that would very obviously be pointing to things like tech adoption, and data points that again very obviously would be pointing to process improvement needs, what would those data points be? And it may be oversimplifying the question, but I'm just kind of drilling down for folks, those being two pretty key areas for most legal practices, both in private practice and in-house at the moment, that they're really focused on. Are there particular data points that they can pull out that would help them to make the sort of assessment that you were referring to and make the sort of decisions they might need to make?
Sure, I would start with the essential business unit of any law firm, which is the matter, and take a look at that matter and figure out, okay, this is how a matter itself is how we document the type of work that we're doing for a particular client. And we break it down by the matter itself. A client might have multiple matters, and the matter itself might have different task codes or matter types that are associated with that matter. And then you also have additional information that's tied to that matter, such as the practice group that is creating that matter, that's working on that matter, the timekeepers who are working on that matter. And then, of course, I think one of the most important parts of it is the cost of developing and producing that matter in the first place. So to answer your question, Terri, very specifically, what I would do is I would take a look at some of these fundamental business units, like matters or clients or timekeeper data, and then look at the relationships between those fundamental business units and other pieces of data. And then think about going back to the who, the what, the why, and the how, and think about what structure, how is that matter structured? Who is working on it? What's the staff resourcing? What's the leverage between the partners and the associates? How many resources are being applied to that matter? How long is it taking? What's the rate of change for that matter? Is it going fast at the very beginning, or is it going slow in the middle? Is it tending to lag? And then also, of course, there's a whole plethora of financial information related to that matter, such as realization rates, recorded fees, billed fees, et cetera. If you take a look at all that as a whole and start drilling down and saying, okay, what if we change this? What if we do all these what if scenarios? What if we were to change the staffing allocation on this matter? What if we were to change the resources that we applied? What if this matter were to finish 30 days earlier and we were to get the billing out 30 days earlier? What kind of benefit or maybe not so much of a benefit would we get out of doing that? And I think the important thing is to look at it from the standpoint of the data is there. We just have to be creative about how we assess it, and then be able to slice it and dice it in ways that provide more value for us, and then look at how the data relates to itself, and then doing what ifs if one of those pieces of data were to change in a certain way. I hope that answers your question, but that's how I interpret it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Carolyn, yeah. I see
Can
your
I just
finger.
jump in?
Tell me.
I love that. And I would just want to add, what about the data that might indicate where there is opportunities to create more efficiency and to drive that through what you've been talking about there, Jon? And also, where can you create more value? So is there a way that you can actually extract data in relation to outcomes that you're achieving for clients out of that as well? That would be a really interesting exercise. I'm going to leave it there.
Well, and I guess to go to a point that Beth made earlier, that you don't do this once. This just keeps happening all the time, and everybody needs to be focused on it, which is a great segue to a question I want to ask you, Beth, which is, we've talked a lot about this relationship between data and knowledge management and tech. And I think it's probably fair to say that we're seeing a lot of emphasis on that, particularly in-house at the moment, a lot of focus on external companies also focusing on in-house. But in relation to them and to legal practice generally, what if we kind of look at this and we say it's just all too hard? And maybe you're a solo practitioner or a small firm or a small legal department, and you're looking at this and saying, wow, this kind of, it feels, overwhelming. And we didn't worry about all this data stuff in the past. So why do we have to worry about it now? Why is it so important that we think of this as an integral part of how we work now?
Great question, Terri. And I guess it goes to what we've all been talking about, which is what's that future direction of law? And there's such hype in the market about, people debating whether you need lawyers or not, which to me is a ridiculous discussion because you will. The question is, how will it transform what you're doing now? Which I think is your question. So several things are happening in the market. Firstly, there's a rise in the legal complexity, and that's been growing over time. Regulations more complicated, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got this rising complexity. Secondly, we've got the technology that's getting better and better, and we've talked about that today. In this forum, we've talked about natural language processing. It's really only in its beginning, and it's going to get better and better. We spoke when we were preparing for this about a product called GPT-3, and I won't go into too much detail, but suffice it to say, it's a whole new deep learning system that's been developed out of Silicon Valley. And it's the largest language model ever created. They fed in the entire internet, all the books. It's huge. It's got 175 billion parameters fed into it. And basically, it's only just been released for testing in July, so it's only new, but people are saying it can basically write press releases and stories and interviews and essays, and you can't tell much of a difference between what it's writing and what a human would write.
And making legal documents easier to read too, right?
This is the question, right?
Yeah.
And I think there are going to be a lot of excited legal technologists out there because it's an open API, which means basically they're going to release it so people can play around with it. So I think a lot of the legal technology community that understands where things are now are going to be doing a lot of tests. So the question is, where are these technologies going to go? They are not, the one thing I know is they're not going to stand still. They are going to get better and better. So it's really important that law firms understand that. The third thing is the rise in in-house lawyers. The number of in-house lawyers has tripled over the last 30 years. And in-house corporates are trying to bring this legal work back in, because it's expensive to outsource it. So they're growing teams to do things cheaper, better, faster. And within their organizations, there's a convergence of legal technologies with enterprise technologies. So technologies that underpin, for example, cybersecurity. It's looking at data, it's using AI algorithms. So is legal technology. So they're going to have access to these technologies in different forms. So there's going to be a convergence. So they're going to be able to use more lawyers and better tech in-house to solve legal problems. They're looking for, so corporates are looking for more for less, and particularly price certainty. And they're starting to use legal technology systems and buy lots of technologies that are now being marketed direct to corporates. For example, there's a system that takes law firm invoices and spots inconsistencies in places that you might want to question the bill. There's another piece of technology, and there are quite a few products now in this area that predict case outcomes, particularly in intellectual property, for example. So they take all of the cases, and these have been developed mostly in the States. I think there are a few here in Australia that are starting to be developed. But they take all the cases and they recommend what jurisdiction to hear your case, what judge you might want to use, and scarily, what lawyer you might want. Well, within a law firm, you want to know about those systems because they're going to influence the buying decisions of your clients. So what's the consequence or the opportunity? I like to think of it as opportunity. There's a big opportunity for law firms to leverage their deep relationships. They have tremendous relationships with their clients of trust, and to leverage those relationships to build deeper strategic partnerships, to co-create these solutions using some of the methodologies that we've all been talking about, like design thinking. So not to sit back and just provide legal advice over the fence, but to walk in the client's shoes and co-create solutions using these new technologies, solving these problems that are much more complex than they used to be. And I like to think about the service model of law firms. So, basically it's all been designed around a legal service model. But now there are a couple other components that law firms are starting to do. One is in the area of products. So building products, and there are law firms around the world that have spun off separate business units to do that. And the third component is consulting. Obviously, I've got a legal consulting business, but Law firms are now building, for example, groups that consult in legal operations back to corporates. So to me, there are lots of opportunities, but in order to leverage those opportunities, I think that change is the word that is most important. And it's how do you do that gently? By leveraging the past. There's tremendous relationship, depth of experience, expertise for law firms to leverage, but they need to build in these new components. I think, like Carolyn eloquently described in terms of what knowledge management's doing today, building tech teams and knowledge management teams and data science teams like what Jon runs. And they've got to have a multidisciplinary lens to do that. And finally, the biggest aspect in my experience is how do you make that cultural change? How do the lawyers in the tech world understand each other? And a lot of what I do is help bridge that gap, help translate.
And a perfect segue to probably another one of these sessions on that very topic. I mean, sadly, we have come to the end of our time, and it's such an important discussion, this whole interplay of data and knowledge management, and obviously tech as well is one that's certainly alive and well, and the three of you just shining lights in that area. So I know that if folks have questions, that you will be open, additional questions or things that they think about later, that you will be open to having a chat with them. And I know also they can find all of you at least on LinkedIn, if not on your company website. So I am going to invite folks that listen to this or have watched it to definitely reach out to Carolyn or Jon or Beth if you have additional questions that you'd like to put to them. Folks, do stay connected with us. There'll be an opportunity to join a whole bunch of these other sessions, connect with us on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, and to Beth, Carolyn and Jon. Just an amazing discussion, fascinating, and we applaud you for the work that you're doing. It's amazing and really valuable, and I think collectively changing the way that we think about and actually do practice law now and in the future. So thank you very much indeed for being with us, and we look forward to seeing all of you and everyone that's been with us today and later back for another session. Thank you very much, and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.